Showrunner versus showrunner arguments seem to take up a lot of Doctor Who fans' time on Twitter. It seems that you have to be part of either Camp T Davies, Camp Chibs, or Camp Moff, and I don't understand why you can't be divergent, and maybe like all of them. It got me thinking about the reception towards each showrunner over my time in fandom. And I have only really been active in the Doctor Who fandom since 2017, even though I've been watching since 2006, because in 2006 I was only 3, and in 2017 I had an Instagram account that was a sort of Doctor Who fan account. Didn't have that many followers, so you won't have followed it, but that was my first real online engagement in fandom. And back then, the general opinions towards each showrunner were vastly different. So I'll dive into and do a little bit of a history of opinions towards Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall over the past 6 years from the perspective of a gal in fandom. So in 2017 I was 14. I had a break from Doctor Who for 4 years, I think, since Time of the Doctor. Does that make, yes, 4 years, kind of 3 years. Anyway, because I was an edgy girl who stopped watching after Matt Smith, and I, at the time, people tended to like Russell T Davies. I liked Russell T Davies. I certainly didn't see much criticism towards him, and it really seemed as though people thought that his era was kind of the golden era. In fact, I saw a lot of people saying that they were excited for Chris Chibnall because they thought that he'd be more like Russell T Davies. But before 2017 and like during Russell's first tenure anyway, I don't really know what people's opinions of him was. I guess they were quite positive because, got a lot of viewing figures, and that was when Doctor Who was like in Toys R Us. But yeah, I'm not really entirely sure, so I'm going to skip to Moffat. I definitely know what people's opinions of Stephen Moffat were in 2017 because it's all people ever fucking went on about. Well, it makes sense because he was a showrunner still and had been for like 7-8 years. People tended to think that he had quite convoluted plots and that he'd made the show too complicated and boring, I guess. People really didn't tend to like Clara. I remember that being a big thing. Like, they thought Clara had stayed too long. They thought her characterization was all over the place, and I do agree with that to an extent. I think that in Series 7, she wasn't quite Clara yet. In Series 8, she was good. She was perfect Clara. And then Series 9, I get why she wasn't quite Clara again. It's because they had to kind of redo the scripts because Jenna Coleman wasn't originally going to be there. But yeah, I get why people had problems with her characterization. The 12th Doctor was generally beloved. I think it was just people didn't tend to like his script as much. And I know that seems wild now because I feel as though people tend to really like the Capaldi era now. But we'll get on to that later. Series 10 had a much more positive reception, but I think people were still kind of wanting to move on from Moffat. They thought he'd overstayed his welcome. So, onto the Chibnall era. Well, we'll stay in 2017 for now. That was when Jodie was announced as the Doctor, and I remember it was a really sunny day, and I'd got some new earphones from HMV, and got the bus home, and it was really packed on the bus home, and then I had to watch some tennis, and then I waited, and I remember thinking, that's a girl's hand. And then came Beth from Broadchurch, because I'd watched Broadchurch that year, so it was quite a weird coincidence. And at this point, I was quite a Chibnall defender. I'm not quite sure why, but I really was like, yeah, I'm so excited for Chris Chibnall. I think because I thought Moffat was the Antichrist. But that was because everybody else did, and I was just a 14-year-old who copied everyone. I don't think Moffat's the Antichrist now. Please, that's just a big disclaimer. I do not think Stephen Moffat is the Antichrist. But yeah, I think when Jodie was announced, people's excitement kind of peaked for Doctor Who, and like it brought back a lot of attention to the show. And I know whenever you say that, like people are saying it at the minute with Shooty and like Russell again, and people are saying like, oh, it's bringing more attention back to the show. People then get quite offended. Because it insinuates that the last series wasn't getting as much attention. I'm not saying that. I mean, actually, am I saying that? Please don't get offended is what I'm saying. It's just that the viewership had kind of declined over the Moffat era. And then it kind of spiked again when Series 11 aired. And when Series 11 aired, I think the general consensus was that it was kind of underwhelming. I like Series 11. I think it's alright. But people were kind of disappointed with it. And when this happened, people then were like, we want Stephen Moffat back. We want the convoluted plots now. We didn't like the fact that Series 11 didn't really have a story arc, unless you count Graham and Ryan being granddad and grandson. I don't know. They were like, yeah, the Capaldi era was great. Well, you weren't saying that 5 minutes ago, pal. And at this time, people still liked Russell. So basically, we got onto the Chibnall era. People were wanting Russell and Moffat back because that's what people always do. They cannot fucking settle for the current showrunner. It was during the Chris Chibnall era that I became engaged with Doctor Who Twitter. It was early 2020, so it would have been just as Series 12 aired. And so yeah, I think I'm quite the expert on this era's reception. People didn't tend to like Series 12 because no, actually that's a lie. I think a lot of people much preferred Series 12 to Series 11. But they also really didn't like this Timeless Child, and people were like, oh my god, you've ruined my show forever now, Chris Chibnall. I'm gonna put you on a dartboard and do Bullseye. Flux then came around, and that got quite a mixed reception because I saw a lot of people really liking it, and then a lot of people really not liking it. But I think that's because on Twitter I follow, like, I do not isolate myself to a specific camp on Twitter. I am divergent. I follow a lot of people who are Jodie fans and a lot of people who aren't the biggest fans of the Chris Chibnall era. So yeah, I get quite a balanced view, but then again, the opinions in this era were so polarizing. Like there were people who kind of worshipped Chris Chibnall and thought he could do no wrong. And loved Jodie, and that sounds really exaggerated. It is a bit. I'm really sorry. And then there were people who thought that Chris Chibnall was the Antichrist. Do you see a pattern here? Then the Chris Chibnall era was over. Skipping a bit. I'm sorry. And Russell T Davies he was announced in 2021 September because I just moved into my flat and I was really depressed. I'd just moved to Cardiff. I was really depressed because I was kind of not getting on with my flatmates and I felt a bit isolated and alone, and I was really depressed for a week. And then Russell was announced as coming back and I was honestly overjoyed. But that's because I'm a Russell stan and I will admit that, and this video might be quite biased because of that. I love Russell T Davies and he's my favourite showrunner, and I was really happy for him to come back. And I remember that before he was announced, I had tweeted once, literally don't know when, you can probably look it up, that no matter what people's opinion is, people tend to love Russell T Davies. And people really agree with me on that. They were like, yeah, we do love Russell. You know, It's a Sin had come out that year and everybody had loved that. So people loved Russell. But then we get on to RTD2 being more laid out. Shooty was announced and that was generally had a really positive reception. David Tennant was announced as coming back. That had a bit of a less positive reception, especially from the Chibnall camp. If this portion of the video sounds different to the rest of the video, it's because I've had an issue with my microphone. I've got absolutely no idea what I did to it, but I'm not very technical, and I think I've sorted it now, so hopefully you can hear me. But anyway, I'll get back to the point I was making. People were upset that David Tennant was cast as the 14th Doctor, as opposed to a non-numbered incarnation, like the War Doctor or the Fugitive Doctor, especially because he's only going to be in the 360th specials, and him being the 14th Doctor could be seen as him overshadowing Ncuti, who's now going to be the 15th Doctor. And because David Tennant is already a well-established and popular actor within the Doctor Who world, it gives him, that's another reason why he could be seen as overshadowing Ncuti. Also, him being a white man after the first female Doctor, the first person of colour playing the Doctor with Jo Martin, and the first main Doctor being a person of colour with Ncuti, again, could be seen as a step back. Another reason people think that maybe R2D2 is taking a step back, obviously we're having Russell back as a showrunner, and this is the first time a showrunner's ever come back after their tenure. But also we've got all of the team behind RTD1 coming back, like Phil Collinson, Julie Gardner, even Murray Gold's coming back now. So people are mad at Russell for that, for making the decisions about David and Catherine Tate coming back, and also using the same team again. But I think I'll try and wrap this video up because I feel like it's going on forever. The point I'm trying to make is that people are always going to be mad. When the era is going out, people are always going to be the most mad at it then. Does that make any sense? I'm not entirely sure. I can guarantee that when RTD2's over, people will be praying for his return. I've even seen a bit of Chris Chibnall revisionism on Twitter. People are going back to his era already and saying, oh god, this is so much better than I thought on first watch. So basically, the moral of the story is all of these arguments are pointless. One day, people will move on from these opinions and pretend that they never said them and be mad about something else, whoever the next showrunner is. God, who will it be? Maybe it'll be me. I fucking doubt it. Then again, 14-year-old me was convinced that one day I'd be running Doctor Who, but in the words of Blur, all your life you're dreaming and then you stop dreaming. God, this is getting depressing. Right, I'm going. See you, lads. Hopefully I will be doing more Doctor Who content in the near future. Please comment below if you want any particular topics covered. Goodbye, and I hope you can hear me.